Hi guys, I'm back with another classic book from when I was younger. This one is called Chocolate Fever. And I'm guessing you can guess, of course, chocolate was all behind me. So chapter 1, Meet Henry Green. There are some people who say that Henry Green wasn't really born, but was hatched, fully grown from a chocolate bean. Can you believe that? Anyway, this particular Henry Green we are speaking of was really born, not hatched, and had a wonderful mom and dad in the bargain. His father was tall and lean and wore eyeglasses, except when he was sleeping or in the shower. Mama Green, whose name is Enid, was a short, slim woman with blue-gray eyes and a tiny mouth that always seemed to be on the verge of a smile. They all lived in an apartment in the middle of the city, along with Henry's older brother and sister. Mark Green was 10 and tall and very good to Henry, except when they would argue, which was often, and then he would hit Henry on the head with anything that was handy, which sometimes was hard. But mostly, Mark was fun to be with, and only got angry when Henry called him Marco Polo. Mark didn't like that, and who could blame him? Henry's sister was very, very old, almost 14. She didn't even argue with Henry or Mark. In fact, she hardly talked to them at all, because she was so old and wise and almost grown up. Her name was Elizabeth. The other morning, which was a school day at the end of the week called Friday, Henry, Mark, and Elizabeth were at the table in the dining room having breakfast. Mark was eating fried eggs, Elizabeth was quietly chewing on her usual breakfast of buttery toast and milk, and Henry was midway through his usual breakfast too. Chocolate cake, a bowl of Cocoa Crispy cereal, and milk with chocolate syrup in the milk to make it more chocolatey, washed down by a big glass of chocolate milk and 5 or 6 chocolate cookies. Sometimes when it was left over from the night before, Henry would have chocolate pudding too. And on a Sunday morning, he usually had chocolate ice cream. So there he is, eating all of his chocolate for breakfast. Don't recommend to eat a lot of chocolate for breakfast. The truth was that Henry was in love with chocolate, and chocolate seemed to love him. It didn't make him fat. He was a little on the thin side, in fact. It didn't hurt his teeth. He had never had a cavity in his life. It didn't stunt his growth. He was just about average height, perhaps even a little tall for his age. It didn't harm his skin, which had always been clear and fair. But most of all, it never gave him a bellyache. And so his parents, perhaps being not as wise as they were kind, let Henry have as much chocolate as he liked. Can you imagine a boy having a chocolate bar sandwich as an after-school snack? Well, Henry did. Just about every day. And when he ate mashed potatoes, just a few drops of chocolate syrup swished through seemed to make them taste a lot better. Chocolate sprinkles sprinkled on top of plain buttered noodles were tasty too. Not to mention a light dusting of cocoa on things like canned peaches, pears, and applesauce. In the Greens' kitchen pantry, there was always a giant supply of chocolate cookies, chocolate cake, chocolate pies, and chocolate candies of every kind. There was ice cream too. Chocolate, of course, and chocolate nut, and chocolate fudge, and chocolate marshmallow, chocolate swirl, and especially chocolate almond crunch. And all of it was just for Henry. If there was one thing you could say about Henry, it was he surely did love chocolate. Probably more than any boy in the history of the world, his mother said. How does Henry like his chocolate? Daddy Green would sometimes joke. Why, he likes it bitter, sweet, light, dark, and daily. And it was true, up until the day we're talking about right now. Alright, that's the end of chapter 1. And it was called Meet Henry Green, so did we meet Henry Green? Yep, he is our main person that we're talking about. We also met his family, his mom, dad, brother, and sister. What makes Henry kind of different from all other kids? He eats chocolate all the time. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, mashed potatoes of chocolate, sandwiches of chocolate, chocolate ice cream, chocolate milk. So but it doesn't give him a stomach ache, doesn't have cavities, and he doesn't have bad skin. So that's why his parents let him do it. Me, I think I'd be sick if I ate that much chocolate. Alright, so on to chapter 2. A strange feeling. Better hurry, kids, Mama Green called from the kitchen. It's almost 8:30. Let's go, Slowpoke, Mark said to Henry. We don't want to be late. Just one more chocolate cookie, said Henry. He popped it into his mouth, still chewing, when he went to his room to get his books. On the way to the front door, Henry went through the kitchen and gathered a handful of chocolate kisses to put into his pocket. He liked to have them handy to munch on at school. But this morning, because he still felt somewhat hungry, he stripped the silver wrapping from 2 kisses and popped them into his mouth. Then after a quick kiss from Mama Green, a kiss that left a little bit of chocolate on her face, Henry, Elizabeth, and Mark headed out the door on the way to school. At the corner, Henry and Mark waved goodbye to their sister, who had to take a bus to get to her high school. The boys' school, PS 123, was just another block away. At the next corner, Miss McIntosh, the crossing guard, waved them across the street. The light is always green for the green, she said. It was her own little joke, and she said it just about every morning. This morning, only Mark, who was extremely polite, smiled. Henry just didn't feel like smiling. In fact, he was beginning to feel a little strange. In the schoolyard, the boys went separate ways to join their classes. As usually, there was a lot of pushing and shoving and fooling around. But Henry, who was always very good at things, like knocking hats off boys' heads and making goofy faces at the girls, was quiet. He didn't even say hi when Michael Burke, his best friend, came along. Well, what's the matter with you? Asked Michael, grinning. What do you mean, what's the matter? Henry said. Can I just stand here? Do I have to carry on and behave like a nut? Okay, said Michael. You don't have to bite my head off. It's just that you're kind of different today. Not like you at all. Just then the whistle blew and all the children began marching into the school building. I feel funny today, Henry said to Michael. I have the feeling something's going to happen, and I don't know what. That exact feeling that something was going to happen stayed with Henry all morning. He felt strange in his homeroom, strange when he went to gym class, and in Miss Kimmelfarber's math class, he felt strange all over. Henry couldn't concentrate on what Miss Kimmelfarber was saying. He just sort of stood there and stared. Without thinking about it, he was looking at his arm and back of his hand. Then he noticed something. There were little brown freckles all over his skin. Now this would not have been such a startling discovery except for one thing. Those little brown freckles were not there when he woke up this morning. So there he is in his class with little brown freckles showing up on his skin. At the front of the room, Miss Kimmelfarber was going through the drill on fractions. She was saying, and if I take 6 1/2 and subtract 1 1/4, what will I have left? She looked directly at Henry, who was looking directly at his arm. Henry, she asked, what will I have left? Little brown spots all over, said Henry. All right. That's the end of chapter 2. So, how did Henry feel when he was leaving for school? Yeah, he just felt strange, like something weird was going to happen later in the day. He couldn't explain it. Even when his best friend asked, he couldn't figure out what it was. What ended up happening to Henry? He got little brown spots all over his arm and hands that weren't there in the morning. So that's why that's kind of not a good thing. All right. Let's read chapter 3. Miss Kimmelfarber's problem. There was silence in the room for about 2 seconds. Then there was a riot. All the girls began to giggle. The boys chortled and chuckled and laughed right out loud. Henry turned red, and Miss Kimmelfarber, who did not appreciate the humor of it at all, turned white. She rapped her ruler against the desk and shouted for silence. Henry Green, she said, what is the meaning? Little brown spots all over, said Henry. I was looking at my arm, and I have these. Little brown spots all over, interrupted Miss Kimmelfarber. I heard you quite clearly. But you see, Miss Kimmelfarber, I didn't have them all my life. I didn't even have them this morning. But now, I know, Miss Kimmelfarber sighed. Now you have them all over. I better have a look at them. Taking Henry's arm, she led him to the window. She said as she peered at his arm. Looks like freckles to me. No, ma'am, said Henry. It just can't be. Why not, said Miss Kimmelfarber. Because I have clear and delicate skin, like my mother. Is that so? Miss Kimmelfarber said. And who told you that, pray tell? My father. Ah, said Mr. Kimmelfarber, exactly. Now you are sure you didn't observe this phenomenon before this morning. That means did I see them? Said Henry. No, I didn't. Well, then, she said, you, Henry Green, stand right where you are. In class, she said, turning to face the room, you will continue to look at your books until I return. In perfect silence, she added as she went out into the hallway. Henry stood as told while the class looked at him. Miss Kimmelfarber walked the few steps down the hall to Mr. Pengelow's room. She looked through the doorway and waited until Mr. Pengelow glanced in her direction. Catching his eye, she waved him into the hallway. Listen, Phil, she began earnestly. I want you to take a look at a kid. For heaven's sakes, Dolores, said Mr. Pengelow. I'm right in the middle of Americus Vespucci, who has little brown spots all over his arm. Little brown spots? You got me out here for little brown spots? I thought maybe measles? Oh no, said Mr. Pengelow. Chicken pox? Said Mr. Pengelow. I better take a look. The two of them turned Henry to the light near the window, right in the corner where the potted plants were growing on the window ledge. Mr. Pengelow poked and prodded and even took his eyeglasses out of his pocket and put them on. The freckles, he said finally. Just freckles. Are you sure? Mr. Pengelow's round nose twitched and he sniffed the air. Chocolate? He said. Have you brought the chocolate milk upstairs already? Forget the milk, she cried. Look, now he has them on his face. Oh, no, said Henry. Oh, yes, said Miss Kimmelfarber. Oh, my, said Mr. Pengelow. And they weren't there before? No, 2 minutes ago that boy's face was as clear as day, and now... Henry felt as if his heart was about to drop into his shoes. He swallowed hard and stared at the two teachers who were staring at his face. Little brown spots all over, said Miss Kimmelfarber, and I see more of them coming out even as we speak. Tear, just one, welled up in Henry's right eye and began to trickle down his cheeks, running slowly in and out of his little brown spots. All right, that is the end of chapter 3. So Henry showed the teacher his little brown spots. What did she think those were? Yeah, freckles. I have freckles. A lot of people have freckles, so that would be a very common thing. But he said his skin didn't have them in the morning, so that wouldn't really be freckles. She went and got another teacher, and what did he think they were? Well, they discussed measles and they discussed chicken pox, but when he saw him, he said freckles. Very common thing. Except what did he smell when he looked at the freckles? He smelled chocolate, so it was like chocolate milk. Last question for this group of chapters. Where were the spots after the teachers were talking? He had more spots, not just on his arm and hands anymore. Yep, on his face. So he had spots all over his face. All right, we will see what happens to Henry and his spots in the next 3 chapters.